Welcome to the Consulate General of Mexico in Los Angeles. Today, we celebrate the bicentenary of bilateral relations between Mexico and the United States. Without a doubt, being neighbors has marked our history and the stories of millions of Mexicans and Americans. Our vicinity has transformed both of our nations. We have experienced periods of war, animosity, but also of collaboration and transformation, of challenges and opportunities. We have developed interdependence and created a new dimension called the North American region. Our relations are wide and deep. We share a 2,000-mile border. In our common border, we work together on issues related to the environment, water, trade, transport, customs, intellectual property, e-commerce, culture and the arts, as well as drugs and arms. Today, we cannot live without one another. Allow me to go briefly through 6 chapters of our bilateral history. The first one. At the beginning of the 19th century, both Mexico and the United States had inherited a colonial past which influenced their culture, religion, and institutions. The first one. At the beginning of the 19th century, both Mexico and the United States had inherited a colonial past which influenced their culture, religion, and institutions. They also inherited borders from treaties between Spain and the United States. Mexico gained its independence in 1821, and the main preoccupation of the founding fathers was to obtain recognition from foreign countries. On December 12, 1822, José Manuel Sosoya presented his credentials to President Monroe as Minister Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary. Mexico at the time was a young nation. It had around 6.5 million people and a massive territory of 4,500,000 square kilometers. The bilateral relations of the first decades gravitated around the sovereignty of Mexico as an independent nation. To give us an idea, Joel Robert Poinsett, who became the first U.S. ambassador to Mexico, wrote Notes of Mexico 1822, a diary, describing his journey down south. He admired the volcanoes upon entering Mexico City, and he wrote, and I quote, "At a distance, Mexico surpasses in appearance any other city in North America." Such was the view of the magnificence of Mexico City. Poinsett was key for the establishment of the bilateral relations between both countries. He started negotiations to sign a treaty of friendship, commerce, and navigation that was ratified in 1832. Since 200 years ago, the topics of friendship and trade have been at the core of our bilateral relations. However, as you all know, in 1847, Mexico and the United States went to war in dispute of the territory of Texas and the border lines. Mexico lost half of its territory through war and treaties. A second period of the bilateral relation was during the decade of the 1860s, when Mexico and the United States were going through great transformations, through civil wars, and in the case of Mexico, through an international conflict with England, France, and Spain. This period in Mexico is called La Reforma. President Juárez established the separation of the church and the state, promoting a secular state. He led the triumph of the Republic against the installation of a monarchy imposed from Europe and the preeminence of a liberal order. President Abraham Lincoln in the United States was fighting with all his might for the Union for Liberal Ideas. The Secretary of State of the time named Mexico as the sister republic. There was an idea of a liberal republican understanding between President Juarez and Lincoln. The beginning of the 20th century was marked by the Mexican Revolution. What started as a political movement broadened into a major economic and social upheaval, granting civil liberties, as well as labor and social rights to the people. The United States and Mexico relations were marked by two American military interventions in 1914 in Veracruz, in the Gulf of Mexico, and in 1916 in Chihuahua. During the First World War, there is an exodus of Mexicans from the United States to avoid being drafted for the war. The economic relations are stagnant due to poor communications and transport. In 1918 is the end of the Great War, but a terrible global pandemic, now we know what that is about, kills hundreds of thousands of Mexicans and Americans. This period was marked more by disagreement than by cooperation. The fourth, the Second World War was a period of many opportunities for our countries, of common visions against totalitarian and fascist regimes. Due to high demand of labor force in the United States, thousands of Mexicans came to work as agricultural workers and to work in the railroads, thanks to the first Bracero program agreement. Mexico wanted to help our ally, partner, and neighbor. At the time, there was an amazing exchange of cultural activities. Cinema became a great tool to promote our friendship and solidarity during the war. Hollywood started also looking at Mexico. Some famous directors were filming there, and thanks to the initial support of the US Embassy in Mexico, the golden period of Mexican cinema flourished. Also, there was a great scientific and technological exchange, including academic, student, and publication exchanges. Several agreements between universities and foundations were signed. In short, it was a great period for cultural diplomacy and of bilateral cooperation. Also, after the war, Mexico took part in the Bretton Woods Conference to shape the international monetary system and Dumbarton Oaks for peace and security. The fifth period has to do with the Cold War. It was considered by some as a special relation between our countries, as having achieved an understanding. Mexico's priority was its industrialization. In the international arena for the US, it was of the utmost importance to have a stable ally in its southern border. The idea of spheres of influence or ideological frontiers is what characterized the Cold War. Mexico not always agreed with the US positions, such as its interventions in Guatemala and Cuba, and they had quite different positions in the United Nations and regional organizations. Even though these tensions existed, in general, it was a period of collaboration and dialogue. Presidential visits became the norm. John and Jackie Kennedy visited Mexico City, and the visit was a great success. Also, President Kennedy returned to Mexico a piece of land called El Chamizal. These symbolic but powerful events marked that period. The end of the Cold War was marked by the fall of the Berlin Wall and the dismantling of the Soviet Union. While the previous period was marked by an ideological conflict between capitalism and communism, the following one was a period of formation of regional blocs, mainly economic ones, a silent economic integration between our two nations takes place. Globalization brought the need to guarantee free access to markets, free movement of goods and services with lower tariffs. In 1994, the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, is signed, Today, we know it as the US-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA. The same year, Mexico joined the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, and the following, the World Trade Organization. Without a doubt, the most transcendental decision for our countries was to negotiate NAFTA, to build together a region of shared responsibilities that will bring prosperity to the people of both nations. From 1994 to 2021, exports between both countries increased sixfold. US exports to Mexico grew during this period from $41 billion to $277 billion. Mexico imported in 2021 more products from the US than the whole of the European Union imported. This clearly shows our interdependence. Nowadays, Mexico is just a week ago the US first trading partner. We have constructed a new vision for North America. It is a vast region of 500 million people and 1.3 billion yearly trade. For Mexicans and Americans to have a prosperous and healthy, sustainable future, we need to continue working together. Our relationship has been portrayed as distant neighbors, ambivalent vistas, common border on common paths, the bear and the porcupine. But I would like to highlight the bridges that we have built during these 2 centuries that are stronger than ever. And not only are the 54 crossing points along the border, but the links between our communities are sturdy. Los Angeles is testament of that. And now, from my experience in the diplomatic arena, I would like to add another chapter for this relationship. And this has to do with paradiplomacy. Paradiplomacy refers to the international relations among local and states from different countries. And this is very important because here we are in Los Angeles and we can see how subnational entities are increasingly active in the international arena. I am convinced that in this relationship, there are more opportunities than challenges. And I will focus on the importance of these subnational relationships. And for that purpose, I would like to share 2 examples. One at our common border and the second in Los Angeles. The first example has to do with my experience while serving at the US-Mexico border. There, I developed the cross-border diplomacy concept. This concept is just a reflection of what is really going on in that region. You have to leave the border to understand it. So I would like to invite you to watch this video that exemplifies what is going on. In a very simple and graphic way, I would like to share with you the concept of the cross-border diplomacy. Imagine that this is the border between Mexico and the United States. A traditional diplomacy would look like this. Here, nation-states display its diplomacy tête-à-tête, face-to-face. Nevertheless, this changes at the Mexico-US border, where the dynamic is very different. Here, authorities and civil society on both sides of the border play a very active role defending their interests, not just face to face, but jointly before their capitals, in this case, DC and Mexico City, and at the same time, they display it jointly before the rest of the world, Europe, Africa, Asia, etc. So far, I have identified 5 main features of the cross-border diplomacy. 1, It is a binational community, intertwined and interdependent in the economic and social arenas. 2. Authorities, stakeholders, and civil society, the community, exercise this diplomacy among themselves. 3. Also, they display it before their own capitals and the rest of the world, both separately and in a jointly manner. 4. The binational community has a specific weight in promoting its regional interests and being part of the solution. 5. The binational community along the United States-Mexico border already exercises a cross-border diplomacy.